Okay, so we're going to pick up now with additional variations that happen in speech production. So we're no longer talking about how you calculate formants with an unconstricted tube. Okay, the unconstricted tube concept was just for schwa sounds, and it was just to give you a basic idea of the vocal tract as a resonator. But we know we never ever really speak in schwa sounds. We know a lot of our articulatory targets are undershot and end up being schwa sounds. But we're going to talk now about the modifications that are made to the formants as we constrict the vocal tract. So when we talk about constricting the vocal tract, we're talking about the tongue being in some position that means now the vocal tract is essentially two cavities, an area in front of the tongue and an area behind the tongue. Okay. Now there will be other speech science people, if you ever take speech science again, who talk about tongue height as being the main determinant of formant frequencies. That one never made sense to me. So I'm giving you the one that makes sense to me because it's really logical and intuitive. Okay, so we're going with how much space is in front of the constriction or the tongue and how much space is behind it. Okay? So when you think about formant frequencies, it's the same rule of thumb for any frequency. If you have a large space, you have a low resonating frequency. Okay, so this is just intuitive. Piccolos give you a little teeny tiny high sound. Oboes and bassoons give you a low sound. Little bells tinkle, big bells are gongs. So when you think about a large space, you're thinking about a low frequency. And when you think about a small space, you're thinking about a high resonating frequency. Okay, so this is the part that you need to remember for the speech formants. The first formant, again, once we're out of the realm of an unconstricted vocal tract, the first formant, its frequency is determined by the space behind the constriction. So essentially that's going to be the pharyngeal space behind the tongue. Okay, so if you picture the tongue constriction in the mouth, the tongue's up there somewhere, whatever's behind it is going to be determining the frequency of F1. If you have a huge space behind the tongue, it means F1's going to be low. And we'll get to specific examples of this in a minute. So the easiest way to think about this is with extreme vowels. So the most extreme front vowel is an E. So if you just go ahead and do this, do E, ah, E, ah, E, ah, E, I, E, I, oh, no, sorry, wrong one. So you feel where your tongue is going. The E, there's a ton of space behind the constriction, right? So the tongue's really, really far forward in the mouth for an E. It's a huge pharyngeal space back there. So F1 for E is going to be really, really, really low. Now, ah, you practically feel like you're swallowing your tongue. It is so far back in the pharyngeal space. There's a tiny little space behind the constriction. So if you picture the ah, the tongue is very, very low, practically back against the pharyngeal wall. Extremely small pharyngeal space. So for ah, F1 is going to be very high. Okay, so the space behind the constriction, wherever the tongue is, the space behind that, or the pharyngeal space, is going to determine the frequency of F1. Okay, so F2, same concept, but now we're considering the space in front of the constriction. So that means if you have a front vowel, like an E, you have a relatively small space in front of the constriction. Little spaces give you high frequencies. So E is really a good extreme. A huge pharyngeal space, a low, low F1. Tiny space in front of the constriction, a really high F2. So E always looks the same on a spectrogram. Low F1, high F2, completely blank in between. The biggest gap there is in formants on a spectrogram. By comparison, If again, just think about the extremes, you go to ah, which we know has a tiny pharyngeal space, that means it has to have a huge space in front of the constriction. A huge space in front of the constriction means that F2 is going to be really low. Lots of resonating space in front of where the tongue is. Okay, so ah looks completely different from E on a spectrogram. Ah has a relatively high F1 because of the small space behind the constriction, and a really low F2 because of the huge space in front of it. Okay, so the formants for ah are really close together compared to the formants for E, which are really, really spread apart. Now, there's a concept that speech scientists have talked about forever, and probably linguists too, this idea of quantal vowels. There are quantal vowels in every language, and quantal vowels I kind of think of as anchor vowels. Quantal vowels are really, really extreme vowels. They are maximally different from one another, like E and ah represent quantal vowels. Okay, they're really extremely different from one another in terms of how we produce them, in terms of the acoustic output and how they look on a spectrogram. The other cool thing about quantal vowels is we can get kind of close to them and they'll still be perceived accurately. So quantal vowels do not have to be produced with perfection. Sort of like, you know how some vowels are really close together, like I, eh? You really have to be careful producing I and eh. Otherwise, the listener is going to perceive them wrong. You don't have to be careful about producing ah and E, because they're so different from one another that the listener is always going to get them right. So they can have a lot of articulatory imprecision associated with them, and it just doesn't matter. So here's an X-ray of an E. This is how they used to have to study speech. This was, back in the 50s when a brilliant Swedish researcher named Gunnar Font figured out the source filter theory. And he did it partially based on X-rays of where the tongue is in different vowels. So here you see the E. We would consider the point of constriction to be where there is, where it's most closely approximating the palate. So you can see it's a high front vowel. And look at this huge space back here. So you've got a big, big pharyngeal space determining F1 and a relatively small space anterior to the constriction, which gives you the high F2. So what we have here, with this tongue position, seeing this large space here, you have a very, very low F1, and this small space here, pretty high F2. And you'll notice here, these are all the frequency regions that lost energy. Okay, because of the shape of the vocal tract, those are frequency regions that just didn't make it through. Okay, so that whole band lost energy. And E always looks like this. If you're ever looking at a spectrogram, you see a real low F1 and the next thing's way up here, you know it's an E sound. Because it's one of those quantal vowels, it's extremely distinct on a spectrogram. And it's extremely distinct acoustically. So here we have another way of looking at this. We've got the output spectrum here. Output meaning this is the spectrum that ended up out of the lips. Remember, with the spectrum we have frequency going along the horizontal axis. We have amplitude representing how much energy made it through going along the vertical axis. Here is the low F1. That means that this band of frequencies resonated or made it through the vocal tract losing minimal energy, corresponding to this band of energy here representing the first formant. This blanked out spot represents all of these frequencies that lost energy to the point where they virtually don't show up on a spectrogram at all. Okay, so these frequencies were damped out because of the shape of the vocal tract during the E production. Here we have F2, relatively high, On the spectrum, this band of frequencies made it through easily, represented here, and we've got F3 up here. So what I want you to get is the sense of how the spectrum corresponds to the spectrogram. Okay, the spectrum illustrates a slice of time, a slice of frequencies traveling through the vocal tract, and the spectrogram gives you over time the bands of energy that it resulted in. Making sense? Okay. All right, so we go to the other extreme now, and we have the ah. This is what an ah would look like in a diagram or that's based on an X-ray. And here we've got the main point of constriction at the posterior part of the tongue. It's a low back vowel. And you can see because the main area of constriction is right here, we've got a tiny pharyngeal space and a huge space anterior to the constriction. So we can see that compared to the E, F1 for ah is shifted upward, and F2 for ah is very, very low. Okay, so again, this is a characteristic quantal vowel. Doesn't look like any other vowel we have. And if you're wondering what this is, that spike, that's an abrupt phonatory onset, like ah, ah. You end up with kind of a click when somebody does an abrupt onset. Remember, these vertical striations represent each cycle of vocal fold vibration. So the oo adds a little bit of a different dimension. Oo is relatively far back. What's the main difference between ah, oo, ah, oo? What's the main difference between ah and oo? Lips. Okay, you've got lip rounding now. And the lips have a huge effect on the vocal tract. What do they do to the length of the vocal tract? They increase it, right. So the lips increase the length of the vocal tract. Increased length of the vocal tract shifts everything downward. Okay, so it would look like ah, except it shifted downward. So when you lengthen the vocal tract, you move both formant frequencies down because of the added length. Okay, so here's the E, really distinctive blanked out energy in the mid frequencies. Here is the ah with the relatively shifted upward F1 because of the small pharyngeal space. And you see really relatively the same relationship between F1 and F2, between the ah and the oo, but the oo is shifted both frequencies, both formants downward because of the lip rounding. Okay, so these are the quantal vowels in English, ones that we can produce kind of imprecisely, and people will still perceive them as the same, or as the intended vowel. Any questions on them? Okay. So this is a stylized diagram of just the first two formants of the vowels. And the point of this is to illustrate that with just the first two formants, we're able to distinguish all vowels from one another. So when people are generating synthesized speech, all they need to generate is the first two formants. When people are doing voice recognition, they teach machines to recognize the first two formants. Everything above that adds to naturalness. But doesn't impact our accurate perception of vowels. I was thinking of speech. Have you guys heard that Stephen Hawking is very, very ill? And he's obviously one of the most brilliant minds we've ever had, and uses a synthesized speech output and augmentative communication system. But he had a very unusual form of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Usually people die like within 3 to 5 years with that, and he's lived a long time with it. And now has respiratory complications. A lot of time when people have degenerative neurological disorders, what ends up killing them is pulmonary complications, like they get pneumonia, and that's the sort of thing that kills them. So hopefully he will survive this. How I got there from two formant vowels, only my brain will know. Okay, So here are spectrograms of two formant vowels, which is why you can tell we go with stylized diagrams, because this is a little bit uglier. But again, you can see the oo shifted downward, the classic e. But notice how relatively close the I is to the e. So it's not always easy to distinguish these two. And the vowels that are similar to each other, you can see where there would be potentially some perceptual confusion. You know, if you're not dealing with the quantal vowels, others can be kind of close, and the listener has to rely on context to distinguish among them. Okay, so a while ago, I forget who brought it up. Somebody was wondering why we hear the sounds, vowel sounds produced by a little kid the same as we perceive the vowel sounds produced by Yao Ming. And what happens perceptually is that the vowel sounds are normalized. And what we're listening to is not the absolute frequencies of the formants. We're listening to the relationship between F1 and F2. Okay, so this is an important point. It's not the absolute frequency that matters, because we know a little kid's absolute formant frequencies are going to be really, really different from a big guy's. What our ears listen to and what we relate to perceptually is the relationship between F1 and F2. How far apart are they? And that's what we hear. And it's that relationship of F1 and F2 that allows us to essentially normalize all of the vowels across all the vocal tracts that are possible. Okay, because we're not listening to the size of the vocal tract. We're listening to F1 versus F2. So when you look at the vowel quadrilateral, this is a representation of the relationship between F1 and F2. If you look at the vowel quadrilateral for men, you can see that all of the formant frequencies are lower. If you look at the vowel quadrilateral for women, you can see that all the formant frequencies are higher. But you can also see that the shape is exactly the same. Okay, so regardless of the absolute frequencies of F1 and F2, the relationship between those frequencies, between F1 and F2, stays the same. Yeah.
You said the relationship between F1 and F2 stays the same because of, or despite something. Sorry.
Despite vocal tract length. Okay, despite the size of the person. Okay, so the way that we produce sounds, even though my resonating frequencies are very, very different from a little person or a big person, my resonating frequencies are probably somewhere right in the middle. The relationship between F1 and F2 will be the same across all of us. Okay, so we know that everything shifts upward with a shorter vocal tract, but it shifts upward uniformly. Yes?
So basically just the ratio stays the same. It's like when you have like 2/2 or 3/3, it all equals 1, but in the end it's just different numbers. So,
yeah, so 2/4 versus 3 divided by 6. Yep, good. Anyone have any other analogies? You guys are really good at analogies. Liquid pouring out of faucet somewhere or something. Okay, so the concept is that when we produce vowels, we're keeping the relationship between F1 and F2 the same. I think I misspoke when I said our ear normalizes them. It's actually our production of them that is normalized, okay, because both shift with differing vocal tract lengths. Okay, so focus on the production and focus on the importance of the relationship between the two. Now, I wanted to mention one thing when we were talking about the vowel quadrilateral. I went to a talk at Rice where a woman spoke who is tracking dialectal shifts in the United States. And it's really, really interesting because we know that certain regions of the country have very, very different dialects. and we know that dialectal differences are manifested primarily in vowels. So she was looking at all of the vowels, not just the points we have here, but all of the vowels on the vowel quadrilateral, and could go region by region and talk about how they were shifting in different directions. But I thought the most interesting thing she said was, her point was that there is no such thing as General American English. I happen to disagree with that, but that was her point. Because what we're looking at here is an idealized vowel quadrilateral that supposedly represents General American English. And her point was that nobody talks that way. But the most interesting thing she said was, people who have moved around the most are the closest to producing the perfect vowel quadrilateral, and they are the closest to General American English. Which is, of course, why I am, because I've moved from Pennsylvania, where my whole family talks with this really, really hardcore coal region accent. And then I went to the Northwest, where everybody talks so neutrally it's all white bread. And then I'm here, surrounded by Southerners, well, kind of in Houston. And so my accent is really pretty neutral as a result. Yeah?
So when you're talking about the shifting, you're talking about, like, as a whole, F1, the whole ratio shifts. Is there a situation where you can actually have the F1 and F2 they don't shift at a normal ratio?
I didn't see that. That wasn't apparent from her. She was shifting the entire quadrilateral. So I have to think that it was both F1 and F2 shifting together.
What would it sound like acoustically? What would we perceive if that were to happen?
I can't do American accents. I can't show you. Her point was that there is no dialect in the country that sounds like General American English as illustrated on the vowel quadrilateral. I actually think the Northwest accent is the closest to it, as opposed to like Wisconsin, where you know the ah is ah, and that's just weird. And then Boston's completely out of the picture, and New Yorkers are hopeless. So there's a number of them that you go, really, really, I know that's not anything close to standard American English. But I think it would be fun to track people. Like I had an uncle who recently passed away who lived at heart of the coal region in Pennsylvania, born and died in the same house, which never happens. And his was astoundingly pure. If you could have transplanted him, not that he would ever have moved, to somewhere else, it would be interesting to see how people's accents change.
What about like in Arizona or New Mexico? Like
where there were a lot of influx of people moving from other places?
You don't really associate those regions with having a specific accent.
But I think it's because so many people moved there. Okay. I think that's one of the things that happened with Houston. Although Houston's native accent is really mild, but there were so many people move here, it ends up being a more neutral accent. Some people actually divide accents into urban versus rural, which can make more sense.
And I work with a guy from Florida, and I was asking him, because to me I associate Florida with almost an East Coast accent.
You bet.
Because
especially
so many people move there.
Yep.
But I was asking him, what do people from Florida sound like? And he said, well, we don't really have an accent.
Nobody thinks they have an accent.
So. But
but there are parts of Miami that sound like you're in New York, because so many New Yorkers moved down there. Yeah.
When whoever this was that did this, was she like getting samples from people that were living wherever it was that she was, or because I know a lot of times.
Well, she started out in Wisconsin.
Oh, and
so
she traveled
there's
and
this
did
bias
it
there.
Because I know, like, moving around, your accent changes to where you are, and
well,
so
she argued,
at what
though,
point
that
does it all come
doesn't necessarily
together?
change to where you are, but that it changes to something that is truly more neutral than any of the regions you've been.
So
which
you
I
have
think
to
is the
do a
most
lot of
interesting.
traveling in order to achieve that, apparently.
Yeah, or a lot of training. You know, actors trained to do neutral accents as well as perceived ones. Which brings me the perfect segue to this. There is a great video I want to show you. And part of this has to do with the fact that accents are determined again primarily by vowels. Now we think of some extremes, like, you know, German consonants have a different sound to them. R's can be different, but primarily in an accent, the differences are going to be in the vowel sounds. Oh, let me find this. I hate it when I move something and then I lose it. There we go. So listen to all of her accents. This is considered one of the finest things on YouTube.
Hello, my name is Amy Walker. I'm 25 years old and I was born in London, England. You're right, I'm Amy Walker. I'm 25 years old and I was born in London, weren't I? Yes, hello. My name is Amy Walker. I'm 25 years old and I was born in London, England. That's right, my name's Amy Walker and I was born in Dublin, Ireland. Hi, how are you? I'm Amy Walker. I'm 25. I was born in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Of course I'm Scottish. I'm a walker, aren't I? You know, walker like the shortbread. It comes in a wee tin with a tartan on it. Buongiorno. My name is Amy Walker and I'm from Italy. Guten Tag. My name is Amy Walker. I'm 25 years old and I was born in Berlin, in Germany. Hello. My name is Amy Walker. I was born in Prague, which is called Praha, in Czech Republic. Hello. My name is Amy Walker and I'm from Moscow, in Russia. Bonjour, je m'appelle Amy Walker. J'ai 25 ans and I was born in Paris, in France. Hi again, I'm Amy Walker. I'm 25 and I was born in Sydney, Australia. Yes, hello, I'm Amy Walker. I'm 27, 25, and I was born in Wellington, New Zealand. G'day mate, again, I'm Amy Walker and I'm true blue Aussie, mate. That's right. I'll always call Australia home. Well, hi there, how are you doing? I'm Amy Walker. I'm 25 years old and I was born in Texas. Hello, I'm Amy Walker. I'm 25 and I was born in California, LA. Hello, I'm Amy Walker. I'm 25 and I was born in Seattle, Washington. Oh, hello, I'm Amy Walker. I'm 25 years old and I was born in Toronto, Canada. What? Of course I'm doing the thing. Sorry. I'm Amy Walker, I'm 25 and I was born in Brooklyn. Well, hi there, my name is Amy Walker. I'm 25 years old and I was born in Charleston, South Carolina. Oh, hello, my name is Amy Walker and I'm an actress and a writer and a singer and a dancer. And I was asked here today to give you an example of the transatlantic accent I was trained in 1945. So this concludes our little program for you this evening. We do hope you've enjoyed yourself as much as I have. Thank you, and good night.
Isn't she brilliant? It's just one of the coolest things. So clearly there were some where the consonants changed too, right? What else did you notice that changed, that almost immediately flipped you to the right accent? So you're talking about nonverbal stuff. So she had some different expressions that went with it, different facial expressions.
She sometimes changed the language, how she said hello.
Yeah. So some key greetings. So there was some linguistic things that changed as well. Yeah.
The speed of her speech.
That's getting closer. Something along with speed. Shape of her lips. Yeah, she was doing kind of extreme stuff there.
She got louder during some and
that
softer
goes along
during.
with the speed. You're getting warmer.
Intonation, maybe?
Intonation, yeah. Really different intonation patterns for some of them. Canadian is like totally intonation, eh? So you could tell with some that the intonation pattern was what was changing along with just the vowels and the consonant production. It's one of my favorite bits. Any questions on what we talked about so far? Okay. So let's go on to prosody, which is why I wanted to bring that up. Okay, so a lot of the issues that we're going to talk about now relate to a more global view of speech production and speech perception. Okay, so now we're trying to bridge a little bit in a really, really, really cursory way. We're trying to bridge a bit the sort of the gap between production and perception, which is an issue that people have been trying to solve for a long, long time in the speech production realm of things. And so an argument for a long time was that sounds were produced as beads on a string, and that you produce one sound and then you produce the next sound and then you produce the next sound, and they're not related to one another. Scripture was a researcher in the early 1900s who completely disavowed that concept, recognizing that we don't produce sounds one at a time, and really what matters is coarticulation, or the blending of sounds. So I know I've mentioned this before, but this is a really, really critical thing when you're doing speech therapy. We do not produce sounds in isolation. We do not talk the way we read. There is an extreme difference between conversational speech and anything else. So if you notice some speeches, my brother, who's not at all trained in speech production, actually noticed this. He said he was watching Princess Diana's brother speak at her funeral. And it took him a while, but he finally realized that he was reading the script. So you can read kind of naturally for a while, but at some point it starts sounding like it was read. It's just not the same as conversational speech. You can tell when somebody has memorized something. It sounds stilted. Again, it's not the same as the natural variations that you get in prosody and coarticulation with natural speech. So when you're giving people models of speech production in therapy, you can't give them stilted, idealized models. It doesn't make sense because it's not how we talk. You can do it if you're trying to heighten their discrimination abilities. So you can go t versus duh. Okay, you can do really extreme things there, or tin versus din. But for production, you don't want people saying the instead of the, because we don't talk that way. So always be sure that when you're giving something to a person to imitate, you're actually doing it in the most natural way. So what this illustrates is just a spectrogram showing all the swoopiness that happens in connected speech. And the swoopiness illustrates the transitions from one sound to another. If it were not a dynamic event, you would have that E spectrogram, and then you would have a little gap there, and then you'd have like a burst for the T, and then you'd have something else. And it would all be segmented. But what this illustrates is the impact of adjacent sounds on each other, and the fact that we do nothing close to producing sounds in isolation. Okay, so coarticulation is a huge part of the naturalness of conversational speech. And coarticulation by no means means that somebody is speaking sloppily or imprecisely. So one of the things that happens in therapy is you try to give a client a natural model and they go, well, that sounds like I'd be slurring, or that I'd be speaking sloppy, and somebody would think I'm drunk. But it's not true, because that's the natural way that we produce speech. So there are two types of coarticulation. Coarticulation just means the influence of one sound on another. And when you're doing the tongue twister project, one of the things that you want to be thinking about is coarticulation. Okay, so is the person making a mistake possibly because there's a sound nearby that is causing the confusion in production? So there's two types of coarticulation, and they both have, they each have a different purpose. So unless it's the initial sound after you've taken a breath, coarticulation is always taking place. Anticipatory coarticulation means that your articulators are getting ready to produce an upcoming sound. So you're anticipating an upcoming sound. And what people have found is that if a structure is not involved in the production of the current sound, it's already moved on to the place for the upcoming sound. So if my lips aren't involved in the production of a t, and there's an R coming up, my lips are already rounding for the R while I'm saying the T. Okay, so if it's not involved in the current sound, it's moving on. Now the other thing to think about this, and also to think about when you're interpreting tongue twisters, is that most researchers believe, and I think this is a fairly reasonable thing to say, that we program speech in syllable chunks. Now you might see some differences with highly automatic speech, but for the most part, speech is programmed in chunks of a syllable length. So you would expect the most influence of one sound on the other, especially with anticipatory coarticulation, to happen within a syllable. Okay, because you're programming that chunk of speech at one time. You're going to say it as efficiently as you can. And if I have a structure that's not involved in the first sound, it's going on to the next one. So here we've got some examples. This one's a little bit not as clear-cut as it might be. Here is the seep. And what you're looking at here is the frequency concentration of the S, right? So we know that S is noise, but we also know that noise has a frequency concentration anyway. And you can see here that we have the frequency concentration for S going into seep. And here we have the frequency concentration of S going into sweep. You can see that it's lower. It's lower because we've rounded the lips already. My lips were not involved in the S, so I could get them in place for the W while I was producing the S. So seep versus sweep. Seep, sweep. You can hear the frequency difference. Seep, you hear how the SW one is lower? So, go ahead.
Is that why when you're producing a tongue twister, you're getting all fumbled and misarticulated because you're getting ready for the next sound?
It is one possibility. So, in the tongue twister analysis, consider whether it's an upcoming sound that screwed up the current sound. The other thing that it could be is that the sounds are so close, like s, sh, are really, really close, right? There's a tiny little bit of difference in how we produce them. It's possible that those sounds are stored really close together in the brain and you just happen to access the wrong one. So there's a couple of possibilities going on. The sounds were so similar it was an access error, or it was influenced by a sound that was coming up. Okay? Questions? Comments? Okay. Go ahead.
So it can't be that you don't have enough time to produce the different...
I would not put it in terms of not enough time. Remember, our speech system is exceedingly efficient. We're maximizing efficiency. So by planning ahead, I can go even faster. So I'm not going, oh gee, I can't round my lips for s, even though I'm going on to w. I'm not going to go sweep, because I don't need a perfect S. You'll hear it as an S where they go s, 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 s. It's still an S, right? So we think of it as a way to increase efficiency.
So even though we're asking them to say it as fast as they can, time is still not going to be an issue, you know, or it shouldn't be an issue?
Well, I think with the tongue twister, you are more likely to elicit errors when they say it as fast as they can, because when people speak slowly, they're speaking much more carefully. They are not allowing as much anticipation of upcoming sounds because you're going so precisely. You're focusing on the immediate sound that you're producing. So what we want to do is try to get some effect of either coarticulation or that misaccess. Does that make sense? Because people do entirely different things speaking slowly compared to speaking the way we usually do. And when you tell somebody to do the tongue twister as fast as they can, it's probably pretty much their typical speaking rate. Because remember, we usually talk as fast as we can. Unless we make a deliberate frontal lobe monitoring effort not to. So here's a more current example that drives me nuts. Rod Ryan. You guys listen to him? And he is not alone. I've talked to other linguists who say they've noticed this before. He does anticipatory coarticulation on words like strike. Now I do strike. He does strike. Lip rounding all the way to the ST. Efficient as hell, drives me crazy. Strike. So all that is anticipatory coarticulation, but to me, it distorts the word so much. To me, that one is no longer acceptable. I can live with sweep. I can't live with strike. So, and this is happening across the country. It's not just him that does it. So listen for examples of anticipatory coarticulation. The one that gets people the most is anticipating a lip-rounded sound. And that tends to have the biggest effect on preceding sounds, because if your lips aren't involved, if it's not a bilabial, your lips can be rounded away and you're ready to produce that lip rounding sound without having to wait to round your lips by the time you get there. Yeah.
Does it matter if I think he's from Buffalo? Do you think that has anything to do with it?
No.
You just have me thinking now.
No, I really don't. It's a relatively nationwide phenomenon. There are a few nationwide phenomena that make me crazy. The other one is in singers who turn plosives into S's, like T's into S's. Instead of time, they do time. And that's all over the place if you listen to popular songs right now. My son does it. My son. How could he possibly?
When I was in choir, we would get yelled at for saying, like, instead of that, your, we said chore, like your, like she's like, I hear the stop it. Like she was like, stop hissing
Good
at me.
woman. Yes.
She would jump on us for doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, some types of coarticulation are acceptable and others are not. And music has its own style.
My boyfriend says rough instead of roof. Now, would that be dialectal
That's
or
definitely
would it be
dialectal.
coarticulation?
Does he say rough or roof?
He says rough, and it drives me crazy.
Because there is a version that says roof.
And he'll say rut instead of root, and crick instead of creek.
Oh yeah, that's just cute.
Okay.
That's one of those rural urban things.
Okay, because I was going to get mad at him for doing anticipatory coarticulation.
It's definitely not anticipatory coarticulation. Does it? It doesn't do anything for him. It's not. It's tongue position. Yeah, it's dialectal. Where's he from? Oh, no, that's weird.
Well, he's also deaf, so I think I blame
that's a whole different issue.
But his grandma's from Kansas. So.
I think you have to factor in the deaf part. It's and you can't get mad at him. It's not worth losing a relationship over because of vowel mispronunciations. I mean, I know we get to that point in speech science, but truly it's not. Yeah.
Okay, so everybody in my family says orange and mayonnaise, but me.
And say what? I have to pick one word at a time.
Orange.
For?
Orange.
Okay, that's a tough one. Yeah.
And mayonnaise.
Yeah. And those are interesting ones because that ya and the or are really vague sounds. And they're not obvious the way they are written. So I can see why people would end up with their own version of mayonnaise. Well, Creole adds a whole different flavor to it. Literally and well, we knew that, yeah, because you've moved around enough. Yeah.
So how can you tell the difference between anticipatory coarticulation and dialectical differences?
Dialectal differences most often affect vowel sounds. And anticipatory coarticulation is most often going to affect consonants. And that's just a rule of thumb that I made up. You may find exceptions, but in general, that's my first pass on it. Dialectal variations really, especially within a country, dialectal variations are very, very much vowels and prosody. So my mother is from Switzerland, and Switzerland has a jillion different dialects for being a teeny, teeny, tiny country. And they make fun of each other. So if you're from one canton, you make fun of people who talk different from another canton. And it's the way they produce the vowels, and it's the way their prosody is. It's just the things that are free to vary are vowels in a dialect. And anticipatory coarticulation, you want to think about the position of the articulators and whether or not that articulator was free to vary. And if it was free to vary, it will plan ahead, as anthropomorphic as that may be. The system that programs it, that programs the articulatory movement, will program it the most efficient way possible. So to make sense, like with the tongue twisters, if you think anticipatory coarticulation is involved, you want to think ahead to what was the articulator doing, and could the articulator be doing something different that would be planning ahead. Does that make sense? So I think a lot of it, especially with the ones like, well, now this is a tough one. She sells seashells. So if you end up with she shells, you could argue it either way. You could argue that that's anticipatory. You could argue that it's perseverative because they were still stuck on the she shells. Or you could argue that it was an access error. They were trying to get the S, they got the SH instead because probably they're so close in the brain. That's what you ended up with. So there's several possibilities for interpreting them. Yes?
I had my best friend do the toy boat or tongue twister, and he was really like persistent on getting it right, but he kept doing toy boat, toy boat, toy boy, toy boy. Is that the whole lip rounding?
You bet. Lip rounding's really a strong phenomena. It may be because we don't do it all that much. Toy boy. Yeah, it's why you end up with it. Your lips are there. Toy boy. It just works. And the sounds are so similar. It's why it's a classic tongue twister. So I would consider that. And then you debate when you're doing 5 in a row. And I'll give lots of slack on this, just things to consider. Is it anticipating or is it perseverating? You know, is it being stuck on something that you couldn't move out of? Or is it being phenomenally efficient and going on to the next sound? I think with a lot of tongue twisters, because you're doing them so quickly, I think a lot of them are perseverative. Toy boat, toy boat, toy boat. It's just easier to keep your lips there. Toy boat, toy boat, toy boat. Yeah.
So that would be perseverative.
That would be a perseverative error. You couldn't get your lips back and forth quick enough to do the rounded and unrounded version of it.
That's what I meant by time.
Just press the little button and tell me again.
That's what I meant by time when I asked you if time matters for the, like, for this
how
exercise.
fast they say it? Yeah, time does matter. I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear. So you're going for a quick production. And one of the things that's sacrificed in a quick production is, especially when somebody doesn't know what you're after, one of the things that's sacrificed is quick articulatory movement. So rounded to unrounded is actually tough to do. Your lips have a lot of inertia going for them. They're not a little mobile structure. So especially with lip rounding, it's going to be hard to protrude lips, retract lips. Does that make sense? So think about the structure and what it's trying to do. And it does seem that lip rounding has a more pervasive effect than most things. So if you've got lip rounding, like with an R or a W or an SH, that may be pervasive in the tongue twister that you elicited. So we think of anticipatory coarticulation as representing efficiency. Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just want to clarify what you just said. You said that the lip rounding is mostly can't say that, perseverative.
Perseverative. It perseveres. It sticks around past when it should.
But didn't you just a few minutes ago tell us it's also the most anticipatory?
Yeah, which
So it's
makes it
everything.
hard to interpret. You know, but I would say if a person, the tongue twister is a unique situation because of the repetitive nature of it. So when Rod Ryan is saying strike, he's not doing strike, strike. He's not doing a quick contrast between the two. So that's why I think that one is definitely anticipatory. If you're doing them all in a row, at that point you can no longer figure out anticipation versus perseveration. So toy boat. Am I anticipating the oi in toy, or am I perseverating on boit? You know what I mean? You can't tell because you're doing 5 in a row quickly. Does that make sense?
Yes, until I have to interpret my paper. I'm not sure.
Which tongue twister did you do? Okay, so pick one that's interpretable. And they are differing degrees of interpretability. But the way to pick one is for you to try it yourself and see what mistakes you make, just naturally. And then see if you can figure them out. Okay, and if you can figure out the mistakes you make, then it's a good one to use with somebody else, because you already know what the answers are, right? But with some of them, like toy boat, I don't know that, you know, you can choose one. You could say it could be either of these. That'd be fine. I just want you to consider all options. So the options are, they're close in space in your brain, you misaccess them. The other option is you were anticipating because you wanted to be efficient to say it quickly. The other one is perseverative. You were saying it so fast you couldn't get back to the right articulatory position.
So for the toy boat, or for any of them, should we say that it could be anticipatory because of this? It could be
you have to
perseverative because of this. But then in our interpretation, can we say, I believe it was
you
this
bet.
Because...
Give me the options. Give me why they're options. And then tell me what you think. I mean, your guess is going to be as good as mine. You know, sometimes you can tell by the way somebody does something. You know, you're going to be there watching them do it. You can see what they're struggling with. So you have to watch their mouth while they do it. Right? You're going to be recording it. You'll be able to see if it looks like they're trying to retract their lips or if they're just keeping them in one position. You know, that would be informative of too. So be sure you watch their mouths while they're doing it. Videotape them, whatever. You know, if you have compliant people.
So just to make sure I copied this down right, they can be close in the brain, close in articulation, or was that something else?
It's the same thing. It is likely, although God knows we haven't proven it, it is likely that similar sounds are stored very close to each other in the brain for production purposes.
Okay, and then the third one was, that word.
Anticipatory or perseverative.
Oh, so anticipatory is different than the other one? Or?
It is. Anticipatory means that because of efficiency, because you wanted to talk fast, if I have an articulator that's not in use for the current sound, I'm planning ahead.
And then the other one's on accident.
No, the other one is because perseverative is because you were moving so quickly, the articulators didn't have a chance to move back to the correct position.
We weren't planning on doing that, though.
It's not planning, though. It's based on inertia. It's based on I couldn't move my lips fast enough because they were too big to get back in toy boat. Okay? I have to get it to some point it's understandable.
She's not down with her struggle. She's not using the microphone.
What?
Table mic.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So perseverative means the preceding sound affected the current production. Okay, so that means that it is based on mechanics of tissue. How fast can you move an articulator? If you can't move it fast enough, the sound that was produced before is going to influence a later sound. So if I'm doing toy boat and I don't retract my lips quick enough, they stay rounded for boit. Okay, that's perseverative because of physical constraints of the system. Not efficiency, just couldn't move quick enough. Okay, so for interpretation, you've got a few different angles. So anticipatory is the one where we're trying to be efficient. Perseverative is the one where we're kind of stuck with, we're dealing with the physical limitations of a big tongue and lips, and sometimes with a velopharyngeal port that doesn't close quickly enough and do its little VP gymnastics. Sometimes you have voicing on sounds that should be unvoiced because you couldn't make the laryngeal articulatory maneuver quick enough. So all of those things are example of the tissue mechanics, God, what accent's that? The tissue mechanics getting in the way of perfect production. Okay? So think about that. Before next time, try to get some tongue twister data so we can talk about it. Okay? We can work on the interpretation in class. All right, have a good afternoon, guys.
Should I say?
If you would wait till